Welcome, I'm Dr. Doug Weiss, and we're going to talk about the children of sex addicts. What are the impacts? Now I'm going to be talking about adult children, and we actually did a lot of research on this. So if you are married and have children, no matter what age, you want to listen to this. I'm going to go through some statistics that may really shock you and maybe give you some tips on what you can do to make that different for them. So stay tuned. Now, if you haven't subscribed, please subscribe. We have lots of information here. And also, if you have a question, go ahead and put it in the box. We'll get back to you as soon as possible. So stay tuned. What is the impact of sex addiction on children? Now, I wrote a book on this, and I'm going to hold this one up because it's called Beyond the Bedroom. And this is Healing for Adult Children of Sex Addicts. And this was a book we did a lot of research on because we wanted to find out what are some of the impacts that children have as adults. So, of course, the people filling the surveys out were all adults. And I mean, the average age, I think, 50% of them found out between the ages of, I want to say, 6 and 15 years old. So they grew up knowing. This is huge. They found out their dad or mom cheated or pornography or whatever the behaviors were. Sometimes they were the one discovering the whole thing, and then the whole marriage could have blown up, and they take false responsibility for that. Now, this is just the impacts. There are so many issues. You know, if we divorce, how do we deal with the kids? Do we tell? Do we not tell? Well, of course, there's no pat answer on that, because if they already know, they need to know something. But if they don't know, they might not need to know anything. If we're staying together or not staying together. These are something I would really strongly encourage you. Talk to one of my team, call the office, and before you go into telling everybody, make a call and find out what may be best for the kids. Because once you let this out, you don't get to control whether teachers or neighbors or their kids tell, those adults tell their kids, and then everyone's looking at your kid differently. You want to really be careful and wise about all of that. But what are the impacts? I'm going to go through statistics right now with you to show you kind of what could happen, and it might keep your ears open for some of these symptoms. Now, these are statistics based on the surveys of adult children of sex addicts. Now, if your children are younger, they might not be here yet, but it'd be good to know what could be ahead of them and to maybe strengthen to make sure that doesn't happen for them, or at least try. I mean, human beings make their own decisions, and if your children decide to medicate in some way because of living in a dysfunctional system, they will make different choices. One might become, super responsible. One might be a drug addict. One might be a sex addict. One might have intimacy and anorexia issues. They might make all kinds of choices. You're going to have to let them make those choices. But let me tell you what some of the things that we have found. Depression. Now, depression is, having low energy, difficulty concentrating, worthless feeling, maybe gaining or losing weight, difficulty sleeping. Depression has its own symptoms, and 62% of adult children said they struggled with depression. That's astronomical, okay? So if you see that your adult child is struggling with depression, it may be because of what's happened with them. Now, it also could be anything from hormones. It could be low levels of other things, hormones and stuff like that. So you want to make sure that their thyroid's okay before you jump to the conclusion it's because mom or because dad was a sex addict. Okay, eating disorders, 38%. And I would say, generally speaking, my clinical experience is women tend to struggle more with the eating disorder side than the men do. 57% said that being an adult child of a sex addict affected their sexual choices. And that's a big number as well. And so your adult children might be making poor choices. And you gotta understand, when you're living with an addiction, alcohol, drugs, sex, food, work, whatever it is, that parent is not maturing spiritually, emotionally, or morally. And so they can't really convey adult values because they're not living them by their anger, by their emotional outbursts, by their inability to make decisions well, not being able to think of consequences. They're generally in the early adolescent stage of development. So your children were raised by at least one child and sometimes two. You have to look at your own issues and see if you're bringing addictions to the table as well. Now, 64% said it affects their sexual beliefs, what they believe about sexuality. Now, of course, some of these children have been exposed to pornography and think that that's what sex is. It's sex without relationship. And so depending on what kind of information they have, and we have videos on that for teenagers to watch to help them with that. But this impacted them. Also, it affected their romantic relationships, kind of who they chose just to kind of be in relationship with. And again, 64% said it affected them that way. Now, some of them, 17%, said it affected them kind of in a sexual anorexic way, where they didn't want to have sex. All right, and that's also a possibility because of the meaning of all this pain that has happened around because of the sexuality of the out of control spouse. Now, 69% says it affects their marital relationships. Well, that makes sense, right? Because they're seeing a marital system based on addiction, whether it was sex addiction or alcohol or overeating or nicotine. It really wouldn't matter if it's gambling. They're seeing a marital system that's trying to function with an addiction, which it has to only can be dysfunctional. So it affects that. 41% said it affects the way they parent. If you are being raised by an emotional adult, oftentimes they're not forward thinking in their finances about savings and investments and retirements and college funds and educating their children about being physically responsible. Because often addicts have challenges in those areas. Now, this is a big one. Self-esteem, how they felt about themselves. When I see the number 81%, that speaks to me of causality. That the addiction had a significant cause and impact on how the adult woman or man felt about themselves. They probably didn't feel as equipped. They probably felt different. They probably had all kinds of stuff they had to deal with a sexual addiction. And so their self-esteem was affected, 81%. Likewise, 79% said it affected their spirituality, their concept of God, their view of religion. Imagine if your dad was a deacon or some kind of religious figure, or your mom was a pastor or some kind of religious figure, and you find out that they're a sex addict. How confusing. I'll never forget, true story. I did a TV show for a huge Christian ministry on sexual addiction. And there was a guy watching this show in Florida who just finished producing his first national porn magazine, and he had him in a big storage unit ready to be shipped out next week. Well, he got so convicted by what we were sharing, he got saved, gave his heart to Jesus, okay, and he destroyed his pornography. But his story was one where he was a pastor's kid, and his dad had pornography and affairs. So you could see how that affected his spirituality, okay? Emotionally, 70% felt emotionally impacted. Now, on that, I want to give you something that you can help your kids with. And it's a book called Emotional Fitness in 60 Days. This thing's powerful because it can help you help your children to learn how to identify their feelings, communicate their feelings, feel their feelings, and switch their feelings so they're not being controlled and dominated by their feelings. Such an important thing because most children of addicts feel emotionally underdeveloped because they are. They don't know how to share feelings. They've not seen it role modeled. They've seen anger. They've seen sadness. They've seen insanity. But rarely have they thought of a conversation where mom or dad was like, you know, I feel this, or I feel that, or feeling this, and this is what's going on with me. That didn't happen. So, socially, 71% felt it affected them socially. Who they hung out with, how they hung out with, what peers they chose. Again, if they don't feel good about themselves, going back to self-esteem, they're not going to pick peers that make them feel good about themselves. That would be in conflict. Dating, 71% said it affected their dating relationships. Okay, again, who they chose, why they were dating. Were they dating out of need, want? Were they dating with the purpose of connection or conquering? Okay, whether they be male or female. 69% said it affected their marriage. And again, if you don't have tools growing up, you might not have tools going into the situation. On that, we have so many marriage books. If your children are contemplating marriage or they already are married, lots of materials there that can be helpful. Morally, 67% said it affected their moral decisions, their ability to discern right and wrong, and actually going with what's right. So their morality was impacted. And lastly, 45% said finances were impacted by living and growing up in a home of a sex addict. Now, in the book Beyond the Bedroom that I showed you at the beginning, there are so many more statistics, and all these things that we're talking about have men and women quoting and sharing the quotes from their own life. So if your children are adult, that book Beyond the Bedroom is probably the best bet for them. Now, if they're younger, you're going to have to really seek professional help before you take them to counseling, and be really careful about what you tell your kids. It's really an individual issue. Sometimes there's legal issues like divorce or separation, child custody issues, and your kids don't need to be wrapped in all that. As parents, if you can figure it out, that's really better. But you really want some extra help. Another variable is going to be whether the addict, male or female, is in recovery. Now, if the children are in such an age where they get to see the recovery, that can also impact them in a positive way. There's no statistics on that. Okay, but the more mature he becomes, the better dad, the more mature she becomes as a mom or as a spouse of an addict, the better the kids do. So recovery for yourself does impact you, which does impact how you parent. So that's also another variable. Now, if you are a spouse of a sex addict, we strongly encourage you, get in a partners group, go through the partners deal. If you are a sex addict, get into a sex recovery group, do the 101 exercises, get into a phone group, do what you need to do. Whether you're married or divorced, you still have to raise these children. And it's best for them to have the healthiest parents possible. So to do that, you're going to have to arrest addictions. Now, if you need help and your marriage is in trouble, always, call Heart to Heart Counseling Center. We're always happy to help you. But do understand, sex addiction does hurt more than the addict. Our stats on what it does to the wife are astronomical. The partner betrayal trauma statistics are really surprising how impactful that sex addiction is on the soul of a woman who's married to a sex addict. Okay, now we're talking about children. So sex addiction affects everybody in the system, just like alcoholism. Alcoholism affects the alcoholic, it affects the spouse of the alcoholic and the children of the alcoholic. Same is true with sex addiction. Nobody gets unimpacted. So hopefully this has been helpful, walking through some of the big things, but there's so many pages of statistics in this book, it would take me another 45 minutes to an hour just to go through just the statistics. So I want you to know, sex addiction does impact your children, but so does how you guys handle the sex addiction impact your children. So be wise about that. Get as much help and support and encouragement as you can. And I would strongly recommend that you get support from wherever you are in your recovery. Get in a group, get materials that you need so that you are more mature. That is the most beneficial thing you can do for your children. Okay, make sure you have clear boundaries of what you need to do. So hopefully this has been very positive for you, helpful for you to understand that it does hurt to hear some of these statistics. but it maybe helps you to maybe kind of plan ahead on helping your children make better choices, be able to feel their feelings, be able to make better choices in their relationship. And if you haven't subscribed, please do. We want to have you. We got hundreds of videos that can help you in this situation, okay? And just in life and marriage and recovery, addiction, partner stuff. And if you have a question, please put it in the box and we'll get back to you as soon as possible on that. We do love that you are taking time to educate yourself. And there's more on this if you need it, but we want you to at least get just a thumbnail as far as, yes, this really impacts my kids, and to be proactive on that as you go through your own recovery process. So thank you so much for taking time to invest on how this sex addiction impacts your children.